Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our Quarantine Studio Visit series. I'm Davana Robedee, the Program Director of the Schweinfurth Arts Center. I'm joined today by Chawne Kimber. Chawne is a quilt artist who lives in Easton, Pennsylvania. She's been exhibiting her work all over the U.S., but the way that I know about her, she had two quilts in our Quilts Equals Art Equals Quilts exhibit 2 years ago, and we were really struck by those pieces. And I'm so glad that Chawne invited us to join us in her home today. She is isolated from her studio, so we will be cutting in images of her work for you to see and enjoy. Chawne, how are you doing today?
About as good as you expect, right?
Before we get into the content of your quilts, because there's so much fertile ground for discussion there, I wanted to ask you, how did you come to quilt making as your art form, and what was your path towards that place?
Yeah. So I grew up in the South, and that means going to a lot of formals. And my mother was never going to buy me more than one dress per season, but she did buy me a bolt of satin every year so that I could make my own dresses. And so I started out making formal dresses. And I didn't sew again when I went to college, but I'm a professor, and when I applied for tenure, I got really stressed out. And it's a situation where you've worked for 5 or 6 years on probation, and then suddenly this decision is out of your hands, out of your control. And I just needed a place to relax. And so I picked up Quilting for Dummies, the yellow book. And I made every project in there just assuming that I could pick up skills that I could then apply to make whatever I wanted to make.
One thing I was looking in your artist statement is you talk a lot about like the material of cotton and the process of quilting being something as part of your heritage.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit more about that and like how you come to think of your actual materials as part of your identity?
Yeah. So my dad is from Alabama, and I remember one summer we were driving to see my grandmother, and you could see these puffs of cotton in the fields as we were driving by really fast, right? And he pulled over because he wanted us to have the experience of picking a little cotton. And it was unpleasant, to say the very least, and was in no way representational of what our ancestors had done on the same land. But I have this very deep sense that I come from cotton, in the way that my ancestors involuntarily were brought here and were forced labor and helped to kind of build the nation. I grew up with my great-grandmother's quilts on our beds, and they were made from sort of utility fabrics, so old jeans and old clothes, and they were already threadbare when she was making them into the quilts. And so then she put patches on top of the patches because as the quilts wore out, she needed to repair the quilts. And so I am very much attached to the texture of cotton, the history of cotton, and how we get to where we are today.
Yeah. Yeah, and I certainly see in your body of work quilts that can be seen as like comforting and like the sort of blanketness of a quilt, but what we know your work for is the use of text and language, and you even have like a not safe for work body of work where you use really strong language and really challenging the viewer and trying to evoke a reaction. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance those two bodies of work and how did you transition from one to the other?
A lot of the sort of geometric quilts that I make that are more the cuddly ones, I'm making them because I'm testing out a new skill that I'm trying to perfect. And it is then applied in the less cuddly quilts. When I first started out making quilts, I was making mainly Civil War reproductions, and I really had trouble at some point after a couple of years. I saw the futility in what we do, right? We take large pieces of fabric, cut them up, and sew them back together in tiny pieces. And I needed to find meaning in the quilts that I made. And so I started exploring sort of issues of identity and difference, and started, sort of putting labels on quilts. And so I have a quilt that's called Princess, and it's the word princess in a pink background with little tiny flowers. And the intention is to sort of ask the question, how do quilts communicate your identity? But the reaction that I got online to the kinds of language that I was using, and even any sort of intention of talking about other subjects other than babies and Jesus on a quilt was found to be offensive. And I couldn't understand why. I also couldn't understand why anyone would try to tell me what I was allowed to talk about. And so that then opened up me to thinking about the power that the words could have on the quilts, and that they really did affect people. I'm also not against making spiteful quilts that will also entice people into thinking about an issue a little differently.
And can you describe any particular quilts? I know you sent me a lot of images that you want to bring up, and things that are close to your heart, certain messages you're trying to address in any particular piece?
Sure. I have a set of quilts that were sort of motivated by issues related to Black Lives Matter. And they're a bit relevant to the week that we are dwelling in right now. And so there's, so I started with Trayvon Martin, trying to find a way to commemorate his death. And his death was very much associated with the hoodie that he was wearing at the time when he was murdered. And a lot of people came out saying, well, if he wasn't wearing the hoodie, it would have been just fine. He would have not seemed to be dangerous in any way or suspicious. And so I knew that that was the politics of fashion that were sort of tied up in that was what I wanted to pursue. And so I made two-tone sort of street art self-portraits of myself in a hoodie. One looks super duper scary, which I didn't know I was capable of. And then others look very contemplative, sort of like a nun in a habit. And it really is just sort of questioning your perspective on a person and what you choose to see when you look at someone. My people keep getting killed by the police, and so each one brings up a different response. So when Eric Garner was killed in a chokehold in Staten Island, in broad daylight on a street corner for the alleged crime of buying a pack of cigarettes, opening them up, and selling them one by one, which, by the way, it's not a capital crime. His dying words were, "I can't breathe," and he said them over and over again, that you could see in the viral video. And I unfortunately had to watch this video twice to count the number of times that he said it. He said it 9 times in the video that I saw, and I wanted to explore just a sensation of what it was like to make those words as a way to simulate the drawn-out process of dying so slowly by suffocation.
It's traumatizing to me, I know, and I can't imagine what it's like as a person of color to continue to be bombarded with these videos that you have to witness in some way.
Yeah, so a lot of people said, oh, it seemed like things were calmed down and that it had improved, and really it's just there was no video of all the killings that happened between this and the last time that we reacted. And the videos are the evidence that's required for some people. Black people have been lynched. By the way, these are all lynchings, especially when they're public and when the videos are spread around as much as these are. But we've been lynched for a century at least, if not longer, past slavery. And a lot of people didn't believe that they were happening, even though there were like postcards even circulated in the early 20th century after any lynching that were pictures of the dead body hanging from the tree, having been mutilated in the process of lynching. And then we entered this sort of dark period where there was no record, where we were a little bit more buttoned up about our killing. And we didn't send around those postcards, and we weren't believed. And so the advent of camera phones sort of bring to light this unjust life that we live in terror. And it's hard to tell someone not to watch the video because they won't believe that something happened. They only will believe what they can see with their eyes. But then you get into all sorts of sort of what are journalistic and artistic questions about the perspective that you even see in a particular video. And it's fascinating as a social issue, but we aren't at the place yet where all lives are valued in the same way. A white woman can accuse a black man of any sorts of things, as we saw with the Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper situation in Central Park about just asking her to put her dog on leash. And she knew the power that she had in calling the police with a false report. And she was going to be believed. And so it's this dichotomy of the world that we live in that means that we, unfortunately, need to continue having videos of these lynchings if anything will ever be done about it.
I want to talk a little bit about, your outrage is expressing this artwork, and then you mentioned a little bit about people expressing offense at the strong language you use, or that the way that you're coming across, where you're not buttoning up, where you're letting it be really obvious what your content, what your statement is. How do you respond to people who are, or do you even bother, who are offended?
So I think I'm really lucky that my audience is filtered by now after all these years. So a lot of people don't confront me directly, but if someone were to share a photo of my quilt, then the confrontation goes on there. And usually it is, a non-Black person sharing that photo. And so they're actually getting to have the more consequential and productive conversation, more a conversation of allyship, and trying to at least educate someone, or if not, to change their mind. But I would say that, any notion that quilts are not political is quite just ignorant of the history of textiles in general. But it's also more reflective of a person's disagreement with whatever statements being put out there. It's hard for me to call my quilts confrontational when they're actually just my recording of my emotions and my experiences. So one of the quilts I can share, it says, I am still, I am not still, I am still not free, is actually, and I made it last year, is a meditation on where have we come after these years of me making what you would call confrontational quilts. Has anything changed since, say, the Michael Brown killing in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014? Has the United States really evolved in the sense that we have more dormant periods when there aren't these shootings? Well, it's not actually dormant, it's just not being reported. And so in my daily life, do I get to live the same life as my neighbor? And the answer is, very demonstrably no. And these examples come just from the past week of Ahmaud Arbery being shot while he was just jogging in his neighborhood, and other situations across the nation that I don't get to live the same life yet. And in fact, the back of that quilt is the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. And, it's continuing to ask this question of what is my status as a citizen of this nation, and will I ever be equal? I never thought of that quilt as a confrontation. It's instead more of a lamentation that sort of also communicates that I'm not just going to accept it, right? In this statement, I am not still. But here I am, and even the letter I at the beginning of every line of the poem recedes into the background in the same way that I can become invisible in this society.
Yeah, I always find it interesting that most people don't know that quilt making does have these really deep political activism traditions and roots, and even in terms, there are even political patterns that, like, the Baltimore album quilt was like made for like politicking, and a lot of the American quilt traditions involved quilt making as part of community statements to be in display with messages. And then political parties had their own, quilt symbolism and patterns and everything. I'm always very surprised when people don't know that tradition, and I'm interested in where you see yourself in that spectrum of quilt making.
So I would say that my quilts are deeply personal. In a lot of ways, I'm just making quilts to kind of stay alive as a way to process what's happening to me. They're certainly part of art quilts as a tradition, but they are very much traditional quilts. I'm just continually asking the question, what if and what more? What more can a quilt say to people? I'm not part of that sort of Whig Party tradition where they would print out, what was it, Tippecanoe and Tyler 2 on the fabrics, and then you patchwork it into your log cabin. I'm also not trying to make statements that are not timeless, right? So I'm never going to make a Trump quilt. And that's because 4 years from now, we're going to think differently about these 4 years. I would rather respond to sort of the deeper notions of our lives as human beings and how we interact with each other in ways that will always be relatable. I have a quilt that's it says legit rape here on the middle of it. And it came to mind after Todd Aiken, congressman from Missouri, made a statement against having a rape exception to a new abortion law. He sort of says, if it's a legitimate rape, then you can't get pregnant. Okay, so he has categories of rape. So there are the legitimate ones, and then there are fill in the blank. It's rather a misogynist statement. It's a statement where he's saying that he doesn't believe women when they report that they were raped. And one of his tests is if you get pregnant, then it wasn't rape. To me, that quilt is not about Todd Aiken. It's about questioning even the culture of rape. So you take this statement that's on a quilt and you display it on a bed, and you've suddenly got a new context in which to question the culture of rape. Where can rape happen? Who can rape someone? And we all know there are lots of incidents of domestic rapes of husband on wife or any other combination of partnership. And take this quilt and drape it anywhere out in the universe. So maybe you put it on a park bench. Then it's asking yet another question.
One quilt that I love of yours, and I've been feeling a lot lately for various other personal reasons in my life, is the one that says, I miss hope. I think a lot of people are feeling that right now. It's, I think everyone is in a place where we've been isolated, we've been, anxious and afraid. Then all of these other things are brought back to our consciousness, and all of these things can be kind of traumatic. And I really identify with that I miss hope quilt. Can you talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so for me personally, it came from sort of two different places. So one is, of course, and I made it at the end of 2018. And so having a sense of where we were politically in this nation, there's there's absolutely no doubt that I miss having leadership of our country. And I don't even need you to focus in on the Obamas. Like, even George W. Bush rises to the challenge of comparison to our current leadership, um, in the sense that we didn't lose hope about the future of our nation when these people were in leadership. And so it's sort of that sense in which we have an uncertainty about whether we all agree about who we are and who we want to be in this nation that's always trying to strive to be better, to strive to reach the sort of the myth of who we are. But at the same time, right, I'm in my mid 40s. And so I had to start thinking, well, wait a minute. How far in the future can I make plans? Can I think about my existence, even just as a single human being in the best of circumstances, being a middle-aged person who finally recognizes that she has gray hair, and no matter how much hair dye you try to use, that's not going to change. It triggered in me this sense that, you know what? I used to have more hope no matter what the world I lived in, right? And I think certainly when I was younger, I was a little bit more able to ignore the world from time to time. And right now, it's all just so much with us all the time.
This has been an amazing conversation. I really thank you for sitting down and talking to me about it. And thank you for the work that you do. And I do want to thank you for the conversations that your work started at the Art Center in 2018 when we showed your quilts then. Is there anything else you want to talk about and anything you want to mention before we go?
Just, I also make fun quilts.
No, I know. She does, I promise. Yes, fun and lighthearted, and all of wonderful, very wonderful, full breadth of a body of work.
Great. Thank you.
So you guys can check out more of Chawne's work at her website, and please follow her. Take a look at what she's doing. She also teaches workshops, so if you can sign up for one of her workshops in the future, help support her work. We really enjoy talking. I've really enjoyed talking to Chawne today, and I hope it inspires someone. And thank you so much, Chawne.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.